They brought it in broken. That is the only accurate translation our language permits, though even that word fails to capture the severity of what we witnessed. Broken implies damage within survivable limits. This was annihilation delayed. I remember the moment the transport bay doors parted. The emergency lights pulsed in slow, deliberate rhythms, painting the surgical chamber in waves of crimson. The air itself seemed to recoil as the containment unit was wheeled inside. Every being present, surgeons, observers, even the autonomous systems, paused. Because we all felt it. Something was wrong. The patient lay motionless within the transparent field, its form small compared to the species we typically encounter. Fragile, inefficient, organic structures exposed and failing. Internal fluids leaked in slow, uneven pulses, their chemical composition only partially compatible with our database. The medical logs would later state, subject recovered from debris field, vessel integrity, 0.
The surgical systems engaged instantly. Nanoscopic repair units flooded the patient's body, attempting to restore order to the chaos. Energy fields stabilized fractured structures. Synthetic compounds replaced lost biological material. It should have worked. It always worked. But the patient resisted. Not consciously, not intentionally, but its body rejected synchronization. The nanites struggled to integrate, their processes interrupted by sudden, violent cellular activity. Tissue attempted to regenerate independently, incorrectly, before collapsing again. Systems are conflicting, an assistant reported. Another repeated. No one answered, because we were all seeing it. The regeneration was not failing. It was being replaced from within. I felt a shift ripple through the observation gallery. Not movement, not sound. Emotion. Unfamiliar. Unwelcome. Unease. Adjust parameters, Arel commanded. The systems complied. The nanites evolved mid-process, recalibrating to match the patient's biological signals. For a moment, harmony seemed possible. Then the patient's heart stopped. Every monitor in the room froze. A single, unbroken tone filled the chamber. Flatline. It's over, one of the physicians said quietly. No one argued, because this time the data was absolute. The body went still. The chaotic signal ceased. The internal war ended. And in that silence, something unexpected occurred. Arel stepped back, not in relief, in hesitation. His hands, steady for centuries, trembled. I have seen this before, he said, though his voice carried uncertainty I had never recorded. Long ago. He turned slightly, his gaze unfocused, as if searching through layers of memory buried deep within his consciousness. Species that should not exist, he continued. The room remained silent. Even the machine seemed to wait. And then, the heartbeat. Once. A violent, sudden contraction that sent a shockwave through every monitoring system. Several instruments overloaded instantly. No, someone began. Again, the heart struck harder this time, forcing fluid through ruptured pathways that should not have functioned. The flatline shattered into erratic spikes. Neural activity surged. Cells, dead moments ago, reactivated. No external input detected, the system announced. Unknown. We did not have that classification. Everything was known. Everything was measurable. Everything. Look at the cellular matrix, I whispered, though I had not intended to speak. Because I saw it. We all saw it. The cells were repairing themselves. Not efficiently, not cleanly, but relentlessly, tearing apart damaged structures and rebuilding them in unstable, unpredictable patterns. It was not controlled regeneration. It was defiance. Impossible, one of the assistants murmured. Eralf did not speak. He simply stared. And then slowly, almost involuntarily, he lowered his head. His voice, when it came, was barely audible. A sequence of sounds, ancient and fragmented. A prayer.
The chamber froze. No one moved. No one understood. Because prayers are what you say when science fails. And science had never failed us. Until now. The patient's body convulsed as internal systems reignited. The regeneration accelerated, pushing beyond the limits of our instruments. Data streams became incoherent, overwhelmed by the sheer speed of biological activity. We were no longer observing a dying organism. We were witnessing something else. Something that refused classification. Something that rejected finality. The atmosphere changed. It became heavy, uncertain. For the first time in recorded history, the doctors were not in control. And as I stood there, watching that broken being rebuild itself through nothing but raw, chaotic persistence, a question formed in my mind. It spread, unspoken, through every observer, every system, every corner of that room. A question that would not leave us. What kind of species survives the impossible? And more importantly, what happens when it wakes up? We believed at first that what we had witnessed was an anomaly, a singular event, a statistical impossibility that had somehow manifested within the sterile confines of our surgical chamber. Even as the patient's body reanimated itself, even as the chief physician uttered words no longer meant for our age, we clung to reason. There had to be an explanation. There is always an explanation. So we began again. Full spectrum analysis, RL commanded, his voice steadier now, though I detected a subtle fluctuation beneath it. I want everything. The systems responded instantly. The chamber dimmed as scanning arrays descended from above, surrounding the patient in intersecting fields of light and energy. Layers of data unfolded before us, biological maps, chemical compositions, neural pathways rendered in exquisite detail. And immediately, everything broke. Data inconsistency, one system reported. Contradiction across all biological models, said another. I leaned forward in the observation gallery, my focus narrowing as the streams of information began to overlap, distort, and collapse into incoherence. This is incorrect, one of the junior physicians said sharply. It is not the system, RL replied. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to, because we all saw it. The patient's cells were not behaving. Magnified across the central display, individual cellular structures pulsed with erratic intensity. Damaged cells did not simply repair, they divided, mutated, and adapted in real time. Some collapsed entirely, dissolving into useless matter. Others learned. They reformed stronger, more resistant, more stable. This is not regeneration, an assistant whispered. No, I found myself saying, my voice unsteady. Because that is what it resembled. A battlefield. Within a single body. Isolate a sample, RL ordered. A micro-extraction unit descended, piercing the patient's outer tissue with surgical precision.
A fragment, no larger than a particulate cluster, was removed and transferred into a containment field for closer observation. For a moment, everything stabilized. The isolated cells began their repair cycle, replicating in controlled patterns. Order seemed to return. Then the system introduced a minor stressor, an energy fluctuation, negligible by our standards. The reaction was immediate. The cells surged. Replication accelerated beyond predicted limits. Structural integrity increased. The sample adapted in seconds, not generations. Increase stress input, Arel said. The system complied. The energy spike intensified. And the cells responded faster. They're evolving, one of the physicians said, disbelief saturating every syllable. No, Arel corrected quietly. Pressure. The word lingered. Pressure. The system increased the stress once more. This time, the cellular structure fractured. For a brief, fragile instant, it appeared as though the experiment had reached its limit. Then the fragments reassembled. Stronger. More efficient. As if the damage itself had been a necessary step. A silence fell over the chamber. Not the silence of calm, but of realization. Introduce pain stimulus, Arel said. The room shifted. Pain was not a variable we used. Not anymore. Our civilization had long since eliminated it, deeming it inefficient, unnecessary, primitive. Biological systems were optimized to function without it. But this species? This species still carried it. Why? One assistant asked hesitantly. Arel did not look away from the display. Initiate. The system initiated the sequence. A controlled neural stimulus, targeted, precise, activated the pathways associated with pain response within the isolated sample. What happened next? Changed everything. The cells erupted. Not chaotically. Not randomly. But violently. Replication rates surged beyond measurable thresholds. Structural cohesion improved instantaneously. Defensive adaptations emerged, resistances forming faster than the system could catalog them. It's accelerating, I said, unable to mask the shock in my voice. Because of the stimulus, another added. No, Arel said again, softer now. Pressure. The word felt foreign. Heavy. Important. The data confirmed it. Pain did not weaken the organism. It strengthened it. Every signal that should have indicated damage instead triggered growth. Every indication of failure became a catalyst for improvement. This is not biology, one of the physicians whispered. I felt it then. That same unfamiliar sensation from before. But stronger now. Unease. Because we had spent millennia removing pain from our existence, believing it to be a flaw. A limitation. And yet, this species had kept it. Worse, it depended on it. This is not evolution, I said quietly. No one argued. Because the truth was already forming. Undeniable. And terrifying. This is war, Arel finished. His voice carried no uncertainty now. Internal. Constant.
I shifted my attention back to the main body on the regeneration slab. The same processes were occurring there, but on a scale far beyond the isolated sample. Organs failed and adapted. Tissues collapsed and reformed. Neural pathways rewired themselves in violent bursts of activity, each iteration more stable than the last. It was not healing, it was fighting, and it was winning. Retrieve external data, Arel ordered suddenly. The command was executed immediately. Fragments of recovered information from the destroyed craft appeared across the displays. Partial logs, corrupted files, environmental readings. I began parsing them instinctively, my cognition accelerating as patterns emerged. Planetary data, atmospheric composition, gravity index, temperature fluctuations, predatory species density. Each metric alone would classify the environment as hostile. Together, they defined a death world. This is its origin, I said. The room turned its attention to the data. Impossible, one of the assistants said. And yet, Arel replied. More data surfaced. Population statistics, biological averages, genetic variation ranges. I froze, because the conclusion was inescapable. This individual, I began slowly, my voice quieter than I intended. Arel looked at me. I processed the data again, hoping, irrationally, that I had misinterpreted it. I had not. The word spread through the chamber like a shockwave. Average. Not elite. Not enhanced. Not unique. This was normal. A silence followed that felt heavier than any before it, because the implication was clear. If this was the baseline, then the entire species is like this. One of the physicians finished, barely audible. I felt the unease deepen into something else, something colder, because for the first time, we were not observing a singular anomaly. We were glimpsing a pattern, a species forged not in stability, but in endless, unforgiving struggle. Alarms suddenly flared across the chamber. Primary body destabilizing, the system announced. I turned back to the patient. Its condition had worsened. Severely,
Multiple organ systems began to fail simultaneously. Neural activity spiked erratically. Structural integrity dropped at an alarming rate. "It's collapsing," an assistant said. "Prepare termination protocols," another added, their voice tight with tension. For a moment, just a moment, the room returned to something familiar. Procedure. Control. Order. Arel hesitated. Only briefly. Then, "Prepare for termination," he confirmed. The systems shifted accordingly. Energy levels adjusted. Containment protocols engaged. We had reached the limit. Even this could not continue indefinitely. The patient's heart rate became erratic, slower, weaker, until it stopped. The flat line returned. Clean. Final. No fluctuations. No resistance. Silence filled the chamber once more. "It's over," someone said. Again. But this time, the words felt uncertain, because we had seen this before.
And we knew the impossible had already happened once. The seconds stretched. No one moved. No one spoke. And then, the heart beat. Not gradually, not weakly, but violently, as if it refused the very concept of stopping. A second beat followed, stronger, faster. The monitors exploded back to life, overwhelmed by the sudden surge of activity. "No external trigger detected," the system reported. Spontaneous. I stared at the display, my thoughts struggling to align with what I was witnessing. Because this time, there was no intervention, no assistance, no stimulus, nothing. The body had simply decided to continue. And as the patient's systems roared back into chaotic, defiant motion, one realization crystallized within me. This was not survival. This was refusal. And if a single, average individual could defy death not once, but twice, then what exactly had we allowed into our world? And what would happen when it chose not just to survive, but to act? Fear does not spread in our civilization. It is not an emotion we are designed to propagate. It is identified, isolated, and neutralized long before it can take form. Information flows through our networks with precision, filtered for relevance, stripped of distortion. And yet, this time, it spread, not as panic, not as chaos, but as something far more dangerous: awareness. The moment the patient defied termination for the second time, the data left the surgical chamber. It moved through secured channels, then restricted ones, then, inevitably, into places it was never meant to reach. Scientific councils received it first, then military command structures, then the archives. I watched it happen in real time, streams of information branching outward like fractures in a perfect surface. Each node that received the data responded the same way: analysis, hesitation, escalation. That final command opened something that should have remained sealed: the ancient records. I accessed them before I was authorized to. I do not know why. Perhaps curiosity, perhaps something else. The archives were vast, layered with forgotten histories, dismissed encounters, fragments of data deemed irrelevant by modern standards. Most of it was noise, until it wasn't. I began to find patterns. At first, they appeared unrelated. A failed extinction event recorded on the outer rim. Cause: planetary destabilization. Survivors: none, except a single anomalous entry, unverified, a species that endured. Another record: a biological contagion that consumed an entire ecosystem within cycles. Outcome: total eradication. Except, again, an anomaly, a resistant population. Then another, and another, each record incomplete, each dismissed, each marked with the same annotation: data inconsistency, likely error. But it was not error. It was repetition. And slowly, horribly, the fragments aligned. A species that appeared across multiple extinction-level events. A species that should not have survived any of them. A species that did. Humans.
The words surfaced in a fragmented linguistic translation file recovered from the patient's vessel. humans. I returned my attention to the present, to the surgical chamber. Because while the galaxy began to notice, the subject itself was changing. Neural activity increasing, one of the physicians reported. I focused on the display. They were correct. The patient's brain activity, previously chaotic but contained, was surging. Patterns began to emerge within the disorder. Electrical signals formed coherent structures, then broke apart, then reformed stronger. "It's stabilizing," an assistant said. "No," Arel replied. His voice carried a weight I had not heard before. The words sent a ripple through the chamber. That was not possible. The body was still critically damaged. Internal systems remained unstable. By every measurable standard, consciousness should have been unattainable. And yet, the data continued to rise. "Prepare containment protocols," another physician said quickly. "If it regains awareness—" "There are no protocols," Arel interrupted. Silence followed. Because he was correct. We had procedures for aggressive species, for unpredictable organisms, for hostile encounters. But this was something entirely different. A being that could not be categorized, could not be predicted, could not be understood. "External authorities are requesting status updates," a system announced. Of course they were. Fear, true fear, demands control. And control requires force. "Delay them," Arel said. The system hesitated. "Authority override?" "Delay them," Arel repeated, sharper this time. The system complied. For now. But it would not last. Nothing ever does. "Neural spike detected," another assistant reported suddenly. The monitors flared. Energy readings surged across every channel. The patient's brain activity leapt beyond previously recorded thresholds, triggering cascading alerts throughout the chamber. Someone shouted, "It's not responding." Containment integrity dropping? The room descended into controlled chaos. And in the center of it all, the patient moved. It was small, insignificant even. A slight twitch of the hand, barely perceptible. But we all saw it. Every being in that chamber froze. The instruments in one physician's grasp slipped free, clattering against the floor with a sharp echoing sound that seemed impossibly loud in the silence that followed. "No," the physician whispered. Another step back. Then another. Instinct. Untrained. Unwanted. But undeniable. I felt it too. That same sensation. Stronger now. Not unease, not curiosity. Something deeper. Something older. Something we had forgotten how to name. The patient's fingers moved again, slowly, deliberately, as if testing the boundaries of its own existence. "It has motor control," an assistant said, their voice trembling. "That is not possible," another replied. "We are beyond what is possible," I said quietly. No one disagreed. Because the truth was no longer theoretical. It was happening, right in front of us. The neural activity surged again, more structured this time. Signals aligned into recognizable patterns. Thought, awareness, emerging. "This is escalating too quickly," one of the physicians said. Ariel asked. The question cut through the tension. No one answered.
because we did not know. We had no frame of reference, no precedent, no understanding of what before even meant anymore. The patient's chest rose sharply. A breath. Its first. Air filled damaged lungs that should not have functioned. Oxygen circulated through systems that had failed moments ago. Another breath followed, stronger, more controlled. "It's conscious," I said. The realization settled over the chamber like a shadow. Because consciousness implies intention, and intention is unpredictable. I turned my attention briefly back to the data streams still flowing through the network. The information had spread further now, too far to contain. Military fleets adjusting trajectories, scientific councils issuing emergency assemblies, ancient archives unlocking deeper layers. The galaxy was watching, and for the first time in our history, it did not know what it was looking at. "Containment units are approaching," the system announced. Too late. The patient's hand clenched. Muscles, newly reformed, still unstable, contracted with visible strain. The movement was inefficient, imperfect, but purposeful. Several physicians stepped back further. One moved toward the exit. No one stopped them. Because something had shifted. This was no longer a procedure. It was an encounter. And encounters can go wrong. I focused again on the patient's face. Its features were still for the most part, unresponsive. But there, a flicker, a slight movement beneath the surface, neural signals aligning with muscular response. It was trying to wake, and that is when the realization fully formed within me. Cold, precise, terrifying. This was not just resilience. Resilience can be studied, measured, predicted. This was unpredictability, and unpredictability is dangerous because it cannot be controlled, cannot be contained, cannot be. "External command authorization received," the system announced. Of course, the galaxy had reached its conclusion. If something cannot be understood, it must be controlled or eliminated. "Ariel," one of the physicians said urgently, "we need to make a decision." Ariel did not respond immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the patient, on the being that had already defied death, twice, perhaps more. I do not know what he saw in that moment. I only know what I felt. A question. The same question that had begun to spread, not just through the hospital, not just through the network, but through every mind that had witnessed even a fragment of this event. If this being fully awakens, if it rises beyond mere survival, if it becomes aware of where it is, what it can do, then what exactly are we facing? A patient? Or something else entirely? The patient's fingers tightened. Its chest rose again, and this time, its eyes began to open. The moment did not announce itself. There was no gradual escalation, no warning signal that our systems could interpret, no threshold that we could measure and prepare for. One instant, the patient existed within the fragile boundary between life and termination. And the next, it crossed it. Its eyes opened, processors could resolve. Visual feeds flickered, distorted by the intensity of the data flooding through them. System overload. Stabilization failure. Recalibrating. Recalibration impossible. The voices blurred into noise, because none of it mattered. The patient was awake. I saw it clearly, even as the displays faltered. Its eyes, primitive optical organs by our standards, focused with immediate precision. There was no confusion in their movement, no disorientation. They did not wander. They did not search. They locked on us. A stillness fell over the chamber, heavy and absolute. Even the alarms seemed distant,
as though reality itself had narrowed to a single impossible point. "It's aware," someone whispered. The word echoed through me. Aware. Not conscious. Not responsive. Aware. There is a difference. Consciousness is existence. Awareness is understanding. And understanding implies something far more dangerous. The patient inhaled sharply. Its chest rose with visible strain. The sound, raw, uneven, organic, cut through the silence like a fracture. It should not have been able to move. It should not have been able to breathe. It should not have been able to. It sat up. The motion was abrupt, almost violent in its execution. Muscles that had been reconstructed moments ago contracted under visible stress. The regeneration systems, still struggling to maintain cohesion, flared erratically as the body defied every limitation imposed upon it. "No," one of the physicians said, stepping backward. "That's not—" "Contain it," another urged, though their voice lacked conviction. No one moved to act, because the patient did not behave like something that needed to be restrained. It behaved like something that had already decided it would not be. Its head turned slowly, scanning the chamber. Its gaze moved across the assembled physicians, the hovering instruments, the shifting light of failing systems. And everywhere it looked, we felt it. Not as a physical force, but as a presence. Focused. Intent. The silence deepened, suffocating in its weight.
"Attempt communication," Arel said, though even he did not step forward. A translation interface activated instantly, projecting a field of adaptive linguistics designed to interpret unknown speech patterns. It pulsed softly between us and the patient, waiting for something we did not fully understand. The patient's gaze shifted to it. For a brief moment, its expression changed, subtle, almost imperceptible. Recognition? Curiosity? No. Something else. Something sharper. Its breathing steadied, though the strain remained evident. Internal damage still existed, extensive, catastrophic by any rational measure. Pain receptors, still active within its neural pathways, should have overwhelmed its capacity for action. They did not. Instead, the patient moved again. Slowly this time. Deliberately. Its arms lifted. The restraints, designed to stabilize and protect, tightened automatically in response. Energy fields reinforced, binding its limbs in place. For a fraction of a second, the motion stopped. Then the patient pulled. Not with efficiency, not with precision, but with force. The restraints strained, their fields fluctuating under the sudden uneven pressure. "Increase containment output," one of the assistants said quickly. The system complied. The fields intensified. For most species, that would have been the end of it. Resistance would cease. The body would yield. This one did not. The patient's muscles trembled as it pulled again, harder this time. Regenerated tissue stretched to its limits, microfractures forming and repairing in the same instant. "It's damaging itself," someone said. "No," I replied quietly. I could see it. The damage was not failure. It was part of the process. The restraint on one arm flickered, then failed. The limb dropped free. A collective intake of breath swept through the chamber. "Increase output," another voice shouted. Too late. The patient turned its attention to the remaining restraints. Its movements were inefficient, almost crude, but each attempt refined the next. Pressure adjusted, angles shifted. Learning, in real time. Another restraint failed, then another. By the time the final binding disengaged, no one in the room had moved to stop it. We simply watched. Because somewhere, deep beneath the layers of logic and training, we understood something instinctively. Force would not work. It never had. The patient lowered its arms slowly, as if testing their function. Its fingers flexed, once, twice, each movement more controlled than the last. Then it looked at us again, directly, fully. And in that gaze, I saw it.
not confusion, not fear. Determination. It was impossible to quantify, impossible to measure, but it was there, clear and undeniable. A will, unbroken. Security units have arrived, the system announced. The doors to the chamber opened with a sharp metallic hiss. Armed enforcers entered, their forms rigid, their weapons calibrated to subdue even the most aggressive species.
They stopped the moment they saw the patient. I watched their posture shift, subtle but unmistakable. Hesitation. The same instinct that had taken hold of us, because they could see it too. This was not a target, not an enemy, not yet, but it was not safe. The air grew heavier, tension compressing the space between every being present. No one spoke, no one acted. The silence became unbearable. And then, the patient did something none of us expected. It spoke. The sound was weak at first, fragmented by damage and unfamiliar physiology. Its vocal structure struggled to produce coherent output. The translation field pulsed erratically as it attempted to interpret the signal. What? The word broke apart, dissolving into static. The patient paused, its brow tightening slightly, a visible sign of effort. Then it tried again. Re. The translation system stabilized, locking on to the phonetic patterns. Where? The word echoed through the chamber. Clear. Recognizable. Real. Every system recalibrated around it, prioritizing linguistic analysis over all other functions. The patient inhaled again, deeper this time. M. Another pause. Another adjustment. Its gaze remained fixed on us, on the beings surrounding it, studying it, fearing it. Are you? The question completed. Silence followed. Not the silence of confusion, but of impact. Because the words themselves were simple, basic, primitive even. But what they represented was not. The patient was not reacting. It was inquiring, not struggling to survive, but seeking to understand. And in that moment, everything changed. We were no longer observing an anomaly. We were no longer analyzing a phenomenon. We were being addressed, directly, by something that had crossed the boundary of death and returned with awareness intact. No one answered. No one could. Because there was no protocol for this. No prepared response. No established hierarchy of action. There was only the realization, spreading through every mind in that chamber, that the balance had shifted, irreversibly. The patient, this human, tilted its head slightly, as if interpreting our silence, waiting, expecting. Its breathing steadied further, its posture straightened, despite the visible damage still present across its body. It was stabilizing, on its own, again, and with each passing second, the gap between what it was and what it could become narrowed. Arel, one of the physicians said quietly, but Arel did not respond. He simply stared at the human, his expression unreadable. Perhaps he understood before the rest of us did. Perhaps he saw the truth forming in real time, because I felt it then. Clearly, coldly, inevitably. We were no longer in control of this situation. We never had been. And now, we were no longer the observers. We were part of it. The human's gaze shifted once more, taking in the chamber, the security units, the instruments, the unknown world surrounding it, processing, adapting, learning. The question hung in the air, heavier than any threat, because behind it lay something far greater than curiosity, intent. And for the first time since this began, I understood the true danger.
It was not that this being could survive the impossible. It was not that it could defy death. It was not even that it could adapt faster than we could comprehend. It was this. It had woken up, and it wanted answers. There are truths that emerge slowly, discovered through cycles of observation, tested against evidence, refined until they become undeniable. And then, there are truths that arrive all at once, violent, unwelcome, impossible to ignore. This was the latter. We began with fragments. We had no choice. The human's language, primitive in structure yet layered with nuance, did not translate cleanly. Our systems struggled, adapting in real time as the being spoke in short, broken sequences. Each word was analyzed, reconstructed, contextualized. Each meaning earned. Facility, Harel said kifily, his voice passing through the translation field. Medical. The human watched him, not passively, not fearfully, but attentively, processing, adapting. Yeah, it said slowly, its voice still uneven but stabilizing with every attempt. There was something in its tone, something subtle yet unmistakable, composure, not forced, not artificial, natural, and that was more unsettling than anything its biology had shown us. We require information, Harel continued, your origin. The human exhaled, a faint, almost amused sound escaping it despite the strain. Human, it repeated. The word resonated through every system connected to the chamber. Human, now confirmed, now real. Human, I asked, stepping forward slightly despite myself. The human's gaze shifted to me. For a moment, just a moment, I felt as though I had been measured, not physically, but intellectually. Earth, it said. The translation system hesitated, then aligned. Planetary data, previously fragmented, reassembled instantly within our databases. Environmental scans, astronomical positioning, atmospheric composition. And as the full picture formed, silence followed. Impossible, one of the physicians whispered. Because Earth was not a viable world. By our standards, it should not support complex intelligence. Its environmental variables fluctuated beyond acceptable thresholds. Its ecosystems were unstable, aggressive, competitive to a degree considered biologically inefficient. It was a death world, I said. The term emerged unbidden, ancient, rarely used, but precise. The human tilted his head slightly. Yeah, it said. There was no denial, no correction, just acceptance. And that acceptance carried a weight none of us were prepared for. I began to process the data more deeply. Atmospheric volatility, predatory dominance cycles, pathogenic density levels that would overwhelm most known immune systems within moments. Every variable reinforced the same conclusion. This world did not nurture life.
It tested it. Constantly. Relentlessly. This environment, one of the assistants said, their voice strained. And yet, Errol replied, we all looked back at the human. Because it was the answer. Living, breathing, recovering. Not in spite of that world, but because of it. I asked. The human gave a small shrug, the motion still imperfect but improving. Yeah, it said. Everything. The word echoed, because it implied something far greater than individual resilience. It implied a system, a planetary-scale crucible, a place where survival was not guaranteed, but demanded. I felt something shift within me. Not just unease, not just fear, understanding. And understanding was worse, because it meant we could no longer dismiss this as an anomaly. This was design. Not intentional design, but inevitable.
A species forged under constant threat would not eliminate struggle. It would incorporate it, adapt to it, depend on it. The human shifted slightly on the slab, its posture becoming more stable. Internal systems continued to repair, guided not by our technology, but by its own relentless processes. "You said I was injured," it said, looking between us. The question was direct, unfiltered. Errol hesitated, not because he did not know the answer, but because he did. "You experienced multiple system failures," he said darefully. "Cardiac arrest, neural degradation." The human listened, calmly, as if hearing a routine report. "You died," I added. The word felt heavy, important. The human's gaze shifted back to me. There was a pause, a moment where I expected confusion, shock, denial. Instead, it smiled, faint, brief, but unmistakable. "Yeah," it said. A small exhale followed. The words settled into the air. Simple, casual, almost dismissive. And in that moment, everything changed. Because those words carried a meaning far beyond their structure. They revealed perspective. For us, death was final, absolute, an event to be prevented at all costs. For this being, it was something else. Not irrelevant, but not absolute, not defining. Something that could be resisted, returned from, survived. I felt the shift ripple outward, through the chamber, through the systems, through the network itself. The statement was recorded, transmitted, analyzed, and it spread. Faster than the initial anomaly reports, faster than the biological data, because it was not just information, it was revelation. A phrase that redefined everything we thought we understood about survival. The staff began to react, subtle at first, a hesitation in movement, a delay in response time. Then more obvious. One assistant stepped back further than necessary. Another failed to complete a routine diagnostic command. Emotional instability, a term we had not needed to apply in centuries. And yet, it was happening, because the implications were too large to contain.
If this being viewed death as survivable, if this environment produced individuals who considered such experiences normal, then what did that mean for the species as a whole? I returned to the data, population metrics, genetic baselines, variance ranges, all consistent, all confirming the same truth. This individual was not exceptional. It was average. Average for a species that had endured conditions we would classify as extinction-level threats repeatedly. Average for a species that had faced predators, disease, environmental collapse, and internal conflict, and continued. Not once, not twice, but continuously. "They are all like this," one of the physicians said quietly. No one corrected them, because no one could. The human shifted again, testing its balance. Its movements were steadier now, more controlled. Each action refined the next, guided by constant feedback and adaptation. It was learning. Even now, even here, in an environment completely alien to its origin. "Your physiology is still unstable," Arel said. The human glanced at him, then at the chamber, then back again. "I'll be fine," it said. Not arrogance, not defiance, certainty. And that certainty was earned, because we had seen what it could do, what it had already done. It leaned forward slightly, its posture shifting from recovery to readiness. "Back?" it asked again. "Back? To that world? That death world? That crucible?" The idea alone sent a ripple of something cold through my consciousness, because it did not hesitate. It did not question whether it could survive returning. It assumed it would. Of course it would. That is what it did. That is what they all did. I felt the realization settle fully now. Heavy, unavoidable, terrifying in its clarity. Humans did not survive because they were protected. They survived because they were tested, constantly,
relentlessly, and every test made them stronger, not individually, but as a whole. A species that does not fear struggle, does not fear growth, and a species that does not fear growth does not have a limit. The chamber fell silent once more, but this silence was different. Not uncertainty, not confusion, understanding. We were no longer asking what this being was. We knew. The question had changed. Now we were asking something far more dangerous. If this is what a single, average human can do, then what happens when there are more? And somewhere, beyond the walls of this facility, beyond the reach of our systems, there were countless, waiting. And for the first time since this began, I understood why the galaxy had started to feel afraid. The galaxy does not change quickly. Civilizations rise over millennia. Policies evolve through consensus, tested and refined until they become immutable law. Nothing is decided without certainty. But certainty had just been broken. And so, for the first time in recorded history, the galaxy argued. The data from our chamber no longer belonged to us.
It had propagated beyond containment, beyond authority, beyond control. Every major civilization now possessed the same impossible truth. A species had been found. A species that could survive death. Not metaphorically, not theoretically, literally. Threat classification pending, one transmission echoed across the network. Recommend immediate quarantine of all related systems, another responded. Objection. Alternate proposal, a third voice interjected, quieter, but far more dangerous. Silence followed that suggestion, not because it lacked merit, but because it implied something unthinkable. Recognition, not as a specimen, not as a threat, but as an equal. I observed the debate as it unfolded, streams of conflicting logic colliding across interstellar channels. Fear drove some, curiosity drove others. But beneath it all, there was a shift, subtle, irreversible. Humanity was no longer an unknown variable. It was a factor, a force, and forces cannot simply be ignored. I turned my attention back to the chamber, because while the galaxy debated, the human continued. Its recovery had not slowed. If anything, it had accelerated. Internal damage, once catastrophic, had diminished to manageable instability. Neural patterns had stabilized into consistent, coherent activity. Muscular coordination improved with each passing moment. It was not just surviving, it was adapting. Again. Mobility attempt detected, one of the assistants said quietly. We all watched. The human shifted its position on the slab, its movements controlled but cautious. Its limbs responded with increasing precision, though strain was still evident in every motion. You should remain still, Errol said. The human glanced at him briefly, then ignored the instruction. It placed one foot against the surface, then the other. For a moment it remained there, balanced between rest and motion. And then it stood. The chamber seemed to contract around that single act, because it should not have been possible. Not yet. Not after everything its body had endured. And yet, there it was. Upright. Unsteady, yes. Imperfect, certainly. But standing. Every muscle trembled under the strain. Microfractures formed and repaired in rapid succession. Internal systems fluctuated wildly as they struggled to support the sudden shift in load. But it did not fall. It adjusted, corrected, adapted. Step by step, the human took its first movement forward. It was small, barely a shift in position, but it was enough. A murmur passed through the chamber, quiet, restrained, but unmistakable, because we understood what we were witnessing.
not recovery. Progress. Every step defied probability. Every movement contradicted logic. The equations we had relied on for centuries, models of biology, physics, survivability, all of them failed in the presence of this one being. "This should not be happening," one of the physicians said. "It is happening," I replied. And that was the only truth that mattered.
The human took another step, this one more stable than the last. Then another. Each movement refined itself in real time, guided by feedback, corrected through adaptation. Learning, always learning. We had stopped trying to intervene. At some point, unclear exactly when, the effort to control had simply ceased. Not out of decision, but out of realization. We could not control this. We could only observe. And so we did. Silently, intently, reverently. Because what we were witnessing had moved beyond science, beyond explanation, beyond anything we had prepared for. I glanced at Arl. He stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the human. The tension that had defined his posture earlier was gone, replaced by something else, something quieter, deeper, understanding. And beneath it, something I recognized now. He lowered his head slightly, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement. And once again, he spoke those ancient words. Softly, a prayer. This time he was not alone. Another voice joined him. Then another. Low, fragmented, uncertain, but present. Because some truths cannot be processed through logic alone. Some require something else. Something we had long abandoned. The human continued forward, unaware, or perhaps unconcerned, with the shift occurring around it. Its focus remained on its own movement, its own balance, its own progression. Until it stopped. It turned back toward us. Its breathing was steady now. Its posture stable. Its presence undeniable. "You said this was a medical facility," it said. Arl lifted his head. The human nodded slightly, as if confirming something internally. "Okay," it said. A pause followed. "Home." The question was simple, direct, uncomplicated. And yet, it carried a weight greater than anything that had come before. Because this time we understood what it meant. Not just the words, but the implications behind them. Home. That death world. That crucible of constant conflict and adaptation. A place we would not survive. A place it not only survived, but belonged to. The chamber fell silent. Not out of confusion, but realization. Because for the first time we saw the full picture. If a being like this could emerge from that world, if an entire species shared that origin, then containment was an illusion. Distance was irrelevant. Time was the only variable. "They will spread," one of the observers said quietly, their voice barely above a whisper. No one disagreed, because the logic was inescapable. A species that thrives under pressure seeks it. A species that adapts to survive will adapt to expand. And a species that does not fear death does not fear the unknown. I looked at the human, this single representative of its kind, and understood something with absolute clarity. It did not need permission to reach the stars. It would find a way. It always would. The question was no longer whether humanity would become part of the galaxy. The question was, what would the galaxy become? When it did, the human waited, calm, patient. "Certain?" it asked again. And for the first time since this began, we did not know how to answer. We did not decide to release the human. That would imply control, authority, choice. None of those belong to us anymore. A clinical conclusion, orderly, contained, but inaccurate. Because what occurred was not a discharge, it was a transition, and perhaps a beginning. The debates across the galaxy had not ended. If anything, they had intensified. Entire civilizations remained divided, some calling for isolation, others for engagement, a few still clinging to the illusion that this could be studied, contained, understood within the boundaries of existing knowledge. But within the walls of our facility,
The conclusion had already been reached. We had witnessed the truth, and once seen, it could not be undone. The human stood at the threshold of the exit chamber. No restraints, no containment fields, no barriers of any kind. Not because we trusted it, but because we understood something far more important. Restraints had never truly held it. They never would. Its form was still marked by the evidence of its ordeal. Scars, visible and internal, remained across its body. Regeneration had restored function, but not perfection. And yet, it stood, balanced, stable, whole in a way that transcended physical condition. I observed from the gallery one final time, my attention fixed entirely on the being that had redefined everything we believed about life, death, and survival. One of the physicians asked Arel quietly. Arel did not hesitate. "No," he said. The answer surprised no one. Certainty no longer existed here, only understanding. The human shifted its weight slightly, adjusting to its fully restored mobility. Its movements were no longer strained, no longer uncertain. Each step carried intention, guided by an internal equilibrium that required no external support. It had adapted completely. Of course it had. "Coordinates for your origin have been identified," Arel said, his voice steady as it passed through the translation field. The human looked at him. For a moment the same silence returned, the same tension, though now it carried a different quality. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. "Thanks," it said simply. Gratitude, another unexpected variable. It stepped forward, one step, then another, crossing the threshold without hesitation. No pause, no glance back, because it did not need to. It already understood, and perhaps so did we. The chamber remained silent as it moved through the exit corridor. Security units stood aside, their presence now symbolic rather than functional. No one attempted to interfere. No one would have succeeded. I followed its progress through the internal sensors, watching as it moved farther from the surgical bay, farther from the place where it had first arrived. Broken, dying, impossible. Now, it was something else, something whole, something defined not by what it had endured, but by what it had overcome.
"Final log entry," I said quietly, activating the recording interface. My voice echoed through the system, carried into the archives where this moment would be preserved. I paused, because precision mattered, clarity mattered. The words felt insufficient, but they were the closest approximation to truth we possessed. Errol stepped forward, his gaze still fixed on the distant form of the human as it approached the final exit. "We did not save it," he said. "No," I replied. The distinction was absolute, and in that distinction, everything changed. The human reached the final barrier, the outer door. Beyond it lay the transport systems, the pathways that would carry it back to its origin, back to that world of chaos, conflict, and relentless pressure. Back, home. It paused, only briefly, and for the first time since it had awakened, it turned. Not fully, just enough. Its gaze met ours one final time. There was no fear there, no hostility, no uncertainty, only something we now recognized: resolve. Then it was gone. The door closed behind it with a quiet finality that echoed far louder than any alarm we had heard before. Silence followed, but this silence was not empty. It was full, heavy with realization. The physicians remained where they stood, their posture unchanged, their focus lingering on the space the human had occupied moments before. No one spoke, no one moved, because there was nothing left to say. We had witnessed something that could not be undone, something that had altered our understanding at the most fundamental level. We had believed ourselves to be masters of life and death.
We had believed survival was something we controlled, something we defined through knowledge and precision. We were wrong. Survival, we now understood, was something else entirely. It was not granted. It was not engineered. It was fought for, earned, taken. And no species embodied that truth more completely than the one we had just released. I closed the final log, but the thought remained, unfinished, expanding. Because this was not the end of the event. It was the beginning of its consequences. The galaxy would continue to debate, to analyze, to prepare, but none of it would change the outcome, because the truth was already in motion. Humanity existed, humanity endured, and humanity would not stop. I turned my gaze away from the sealed door, though the image of that final moment remained fixed within my consciousness. The scars, the steady movement, the unbroken will, and I understood with absolute certainty the warning we now carried, not as a threat, but as a fact. Humanity is not defined by its strength. Strength can be measured, strength can be matched, strength can be overcome. But this was something else. Humanity is defined by its refusal to surrender, and a species that refuses to surrender cannot be stopped. Not by environment, not by catastrophe, not even by death itself. The stars will learn this, as we did. Too late to forget.
Too early to understand. And when they do, they will ask the same question we once asked in that silent, sterile chamber. What kind of species survives the impossible? Now we know, and that knowledge will echo across the galaxy, for as long as humanity continues to rise.